Hi, welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. How are we doing? It's been a day-long conference.
Yes, this is the home stretch, so thanks for sticking with all of us. We hope it'll be worth it.
Yes, we appreciate your time. I'm so excited to be in conversation this afternoon with Chow. I was just sharing with her backstage that I speed read through her book this weekend because I could not stop reading. It was so fascinating, and it meets an important moment that we're in. And Anne, I want to hear a little bit from your own words on, first of all, your career. How did we get here? You're an author, You're a board member, you were a leader.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lizzie, and thanks, Steve, for the wonderful introduction. First of all, I want to start by saying thanks to all of you, HR professionals. I could not have had or continue to have the career that I'm having without HR by my side. I have valued HR as a partner throughout my whole career, and quite frankly, I think that's been one of the keys to my success. So a little bit quick about the journey here. I'm a second-generation American. My parents were immigrants to this country. They came here from their native country of Taiwan with almost nothing. I spent 32 years at AT&T, all different flavors of AT&T. Throughout that time, I had 17 different roles and 26 different bosses. Yes, I counted. I spent most of my career on the business-to-business side of the organization, so I've pretty much had every functional role with the exception of the corporate roles like finance and HR, hence why I value your partnership so immensely. So I have been, Leslie, what I consider to be a lifelong student and practitioner of leadership. I don't have a PhD, much to my parents' chagrin, and so I have just always been fascinated by the topic of leadership. I also happen to be a Gen Xer. I'm an old Gen Xer and the mom of 2 Gen Z daughters who have recently entered the workplace. And so I have a great passion for next generation leaders of all kinds, and actually view it to be part of my responsibility, my personal and professional responsibility to develop, discover, and raise the next generation of leaders, if you will.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And thank you so much for talking us through that. I can relate. I'm first generation Mexican American, and my parents probably also want me to have a PhD, not working in startups. But tell me a little bit more about what inspired your book, Lead Bigger. What did you see that was really missing?
Yeah. So it may not surprise all of you, but I was often the first or the only of most everything. When I first started in the company, I started my career as a network engineer. I have a degree in electrical engineering, and I was the only woman in my group outside of my boss. I tended to be, in those early parts of my career, the youngest person in the room as well. And so I was always acutely aware, and this probably even started from childhood, maybe something that you experienced as well, or many of you, that I never really quite fit. I never really perfectly fit into any category or any box, and I found myself being very different. So I had this hyper-consciousness of belonging from the opposite, because I never really felt when I was younger that I belonged. And so as a leader, actually my opening story in my book is the first time I became a people manager. Maybe similar to many of your organizations at AT&T back in the day. That's something that Gen Xers say, back in the day. My kids would say it's back in the geriatric era, okay? Back in the 90s, because that was so dang long ago. But back in those days, one of the formative experiences that AT&T wanted you to have was to manage a large team. So that was the very first time I managed people. It was a role that was several hundred people spread across the country, mostly union frontline employees. And I had no idea what I was doing, quite frankly. So I went in there petrified, not knowing anything, in my mid-20s, overnight responsible for a workforce that was more than average twice my age and far more years of service. And I realized that in those early moments when I was being called names behind my back and to my face, right? A couple of my techs bet me that I would be gone in 6 months. They called me a whippersnapper. They said I was just there to get my box checked, if you will. I realized in that moment that I had an opportunity to support them, to help elevate their work, and to do something really special. And I mean, it worked in a way, and 3 years later, after I was in what I would call the boot camp of my career, those early years, I realized that the key to leadership is that it's really all about the people. And it's that old adage where you manage things, but you lead people. That is ultimately what leadership is about. It is about the people. And so that's what I internalized. To your question about leading bigger, because I had this background of not belonging, right? Because I felt excluded many of times, right? Last person to be picked on the team, or just, I didn't fit into the archetype of what popular was supposed to look like, and this kind of thing. I focused in the early years of my career on, it wasn't really a word back then, but inclusion, and really trying to connect to other people. I knew I was already different just on the way that people received me, because I was one of so few. So I always worked harder at trying to meet people where they were on an individual level, right? To work on my own flexibility, to figure out how to better connect with somebody, to find common ground, despite the fact that they may have clear biases about what I didn't know or what I might know or what their thoughts were because I was so inexperienced or I was a particular way. And that's where the notion was really born. And then as my career advanced, and I've been so fortunate to have a career that's been filled with many large experiences and executive experiences, strategic experiences, I always thought that my approach to leadership was not that complicated. Right? It's so much of what you all have been talking about throughout the day, right? To be people-centric, to be connection-based, communication-based, trust-based. Vulnerability is a word I've heard throughout the day. I actually correlate that word with authenticity. Right? I think one of the really important traits that leaders in today's world must have is that they need to be authentic, because the younger workforce, they can smoke it out immediately when you're not, right? And so I wanted to write a book about how I led, but not because I wanted to write a memoir. I think there's plenty of memoirs from past CEOs and whatnot, and I have no desire to live in my former glory. But I wanted to write a practical book about how to lead inclusively. I believe that inclusive leadership is a core competency of the modern world. I absolutely, in my, every cell of my body believes that if you do not learn how to choose to lead inclusively, you're going to lose to somebody who does. But I was also sensitive to the bias around the word inclusion, and I wanted a bigger, this is probably because I also live in the state of Texas, I live in Dallas, but I wanted to call it something different, something that would really capture what inclusion meant for me to how I practice it, and that's how we came up with lead bigger. Yeah. And my definition of leading bigger, which is synonymous with inclusive leadership, is simply widening your perspective to have greater performance and impact. So I'll say that again. Widening your perspective to have greater performance and impact. And of course, as we all know, there are several ways you can continuously widen your perspective. One, which is the most common one, I think, that we focus on, is surround yourself with different people who are different than you. Different perspectives, different backgrounds, experiences, different demographics. But you can also seek, especially in today's world, different information sources, right? So Leslie, your background is in the media, right? Yes. Do you seek different information sources than the ones you always go to, right? Are you expanding your perspectives through seeking much more data, different sources of data, different contexts for data? And the third one is, are you seeking different experiences than you have on a day-to-day basis? So I always tell people, hey, if you have a desk job, go spend some time in the field. If you have a field role, go spend some time with your people, with your friends in corporate. This doesn't mean switching job assignments. Go live in a day in the life of, right? Widen your perspective for greater performance and impact. And in this moment, and so much of the theme of this conference has been about the fact that we are more interconnected as a world as we ever have been, would you not agree? But we are more divided and polarized than we ever have been, right? And this is not a statement about the United States, it's a statement about the world. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of widening your perspectives for greater performance and impact, of inclusion in a much broader way, was really how this idea of the book was born.
Yeah, this is so fascinating, and I really like how you said being able to find that common ground. And I did pull some data from your book, okay. But I thought this was fascinating that 25% of the workforce is 55 and up. Then you have half of Gen Z who are also in the workforce. Half of them are minorities. And to your point, when you shared about getting started with AT&T, you were dealing with so many folks. And so what I think you've done beautifully in the book is you've really widened the lens on what DEI means beyond gender and race. You mentioned right now we are in a moment where we are really divided. How can, especially folks in this room who a lot of people go to for solutions, how can we really encourage just us as people, us as leaders, to come together? I mean, we have 5 generations working in the workforce right now. That was so fascinating to me in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just say something, maybe quick, I'll try to make it quick, on DEI, right? Because this has been a little bit of a taboo subject. Here's how I process that. First of all, I've never been a fan of the acronym. Might surprise you, just given my background and my profile. The reason why I've never been a fan of the acronym is that it simplifies and oversimplifies 3 very different, often interrelated, strategic realities and imperatives. So what's the D, diversity? Okay, diversity to me is just a reality. You can choose to ignore the fact that the world is, humankind is, society is becoming more and more diverse, industries are becoming more and more diverse, right? It's a reality, so you can choose to ignore that, or you can choose to embrace it in all facets of what that is opportunistically and practically. Equity is just simply about fairness. So you as a company, as an organization, as a team, have to decide what aspects of fairness are important to you. Is fairness in the hiring practices important, right? Is fairness, and AT&T was all about closing the digital divide. So a big part of our mission was really around closing that digital divide to ensure fair and equitable access to broadband services all around the country, right? So you've got to decide as a leadership team what aspects of fairness are you going to embrace in your business. And then inclusion requires action, and this is why I wrote a book about inclusion. Inclusion requires that we widen our perspective for greater performance and impact, right? And so my advice around how we do that in this moment is, I quite frankly, and I sit on 3 public company boards today, and I also teach at Kellogg Northwestern. I tell people not to get caught up in the rhetoric, right? Quite frankly, I care less about what a person says than what they actually do. And I've been asked questions of, well, how about these companies that are scrubbing their websites or not saying this? Or ultimately, to me, it's about what you do, right? Are you living your purpose and values as a company, as an organization? Is it clear? And is it based on a set of values that includes respect, integrity, right? Innovation, right? If it does, then by default, you are going to have leaders and develop a culture of one that is bigger, that is more inclusive, that is more innovative, that is more creative. And here's a thought for all of you. Inclusion is the ultimate tool, is it not, for meritocracy? Isn't that what it's actually been about? Hasn't it been about, in its initial thought, was let us make sure that we are tapping into talent pools wherever they are, whatever they look like, wherever they may come from, however they may or may not be educated in a classical way, because we do not want to narrow our aperture to only look for talent in the same places, right? Talent is going to come from, it is coming from all over the world, right? Talent doesn't look like an Ivy League degree, right? It doesn't only look like an Ivy degree or an advanced degree or whatnot, right? And so, ironically, inclusion is necessary if you want to field the best team today and tomorrow. And that's how I've always learned to lead. That's how I practice leadership, and that's what I talk about now in terms of being key for us to make progress together.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to talk a little bit, especially for the folks in the room, one part of your book that really stood out with me for today's audience was this idea that sometimes HR folks do feel excluded, like, HR's coming or HR's over there, What are some ways that the folks here can really take care of themselves as well as we navigate not only some of the divisions we're seeing around us, but also inter-company political divisions?
Yeah. This is, Leslie, such a great question. This is why I started out by thanking all of you. You are carrying a heavy load. In fact, no joke, I was back there, and I've been mostly with you the whole day here, just getting a feel for all of you and the discussion points. But I literally texted 2 of my former HR partners in 2 different jobs to ask them how they were doing. Okay, right? I'm like, thinking of you, hoping you're okay. If you want to talk, I'm a safe place now. I don't work there anymore. So first of all, you have to practice what you preach, which is we've spent so much of the day talking about wellness, right? Here's Anne's view of wellness. How can you expect people to perform at their best, which is what every sane and great leader wants, right? They want their people to perform at their best, not only as individuals, but also as a collective. How can you expect them to perform at their best if they're not at their best? At their best physically, emotionally, and mentally, and spiritually, if that's something important to them. So you need to do that for yourselves, because you are carrying so much of the burden and so much of the load in the organization. You are the safe haven, right? But you're also walking this fine line of you are the HR team and the HR leaders for your company. So as much as you care about the individuals, you're there because of your role, and you have a job to do for your company, right? So is this delicate balance of caring for individuals and the people, but also you have a obligation in your role to take care of the company and move the company forward. So I would say, first of all, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure that you are practicing what you preach, all right, and leaning on each other. I would also say that, and I suspect that many of you are already doing this, you got to lean on the leaders who are right there with you, who view you as partners, who are also culture carriers. The way my book is structured is there are 3 sections. It's about the work, and the chapters there are purpose, values, and performance. It's about the workforce, where I talk about well-being, dimensionality, and vitality, and then the workplace, which I use as a word to describe the overall work environment. And there I talk about safety, boundaries, and flexibility. I also have a bonus section at the end where I interviewed General Stanley McChrystal, Ariana Huffington, and Adam Grant individually to get their view on inclusion, right? So that's because I wanted to widen my perspective about inclusion. But what you've got to do, right, and the reason why I wrote the book this way, this book is not a book for HR professionals, right? It's a book for anyone who chooses to be a leader today, anyone who aspires to be a leader tomorrow. I view that every leader's role is to be responsible for the workforce, and workplace. Too often in companies, you see the role of culture carrier delegated to HR. You know this doesn't work, right? It's one of the reasons why we've been talking about many of the things, right? Where is the challenge greatest? Is at the leadership level, at the manager level, with HR, with the employee, and whatnot. And so you've got to find those allies and those sponsors, those true believers in the fact that success requires people-centered, human-centered leadership, now more than ever, right? If one of the big takeaways I hope that you've gotten from today is that in our current and future workforce, leaders must not only be responsible for the human workforce, they're also becoming responsible for the digital workforce, which means that the premium on understanding where and how to leverage humans in your business, in all facets of your business, becomes a vital skill set, right? A vital expertise that, quite frankly, right now nobody has, because none of us really fully understand what AI is going to mean on a broader scale. So,
yeah, no, that was so beautifully said. We are coming up on time, and we want to be respectful of everybody, so you can get to your respective places and take care of yourselves. I've seen some folks writing notes, and what are 3 things, maybe even just 2 things, that folks can do in this rest of the week, next week, to really help themselves step forward, not only in taking care of themselves, but seeing themselves as the leaders that they are?
Yeah. Well, I have 3 foundational leadership beliefs. I'm going to work through the 3 of them, probably just as a bolster to give you hope that the roles you play are so critical. So here are Anne's 3 foundational leadership beliefs, and they are the foundation for why I wrote this book, and they are how I practice leadership today, even in the boardroom. Okay, even in the boardroom. So the first one is that every business is a people business. Every business is a people business. So if you're in a nonprofit, or you're in a startup, or you're in a PE-backed operating company, or you're in a global multinational public company, every business is a people business. And so the sooner that the company realizes that it's not business that drives the people, it's people that drive the business, the better off they're going to be, right? You are key for that. Be sure that you are always championing that reality, that it is people who drive the business. Therefore, as an example, after every layoff, we have to figure out how to rebuild trust. We have to address the fear of everyone looking over their shoulder. I was just working with a company the other day, and I went through this with them. You all just went through your very first layoff in a long time. So the environment right now is full of fear, doubt, and worry that they may lose their job. Like, when's the next shoe to drop, right? Unless you address that proactively, you will not move forward. So every business is a people business. The second one is foundational leadership belief, is that leadership is a choice, and it transcends. And leadership has no gender, no color, no title, no position, no race, no religion, no politics, no age, no language. Leadership is the one thing that transcends all of humankind that is required to advance progress. Now, how do I define leadership? Leadership is the ability to align a group of people, to motivate them, to inspire them to get something done, to execute towards a common goal, something that's greater than themselves, okay? So leadership transcends, and it's a choice. So I would encourage you, this is actually something that I see companies not moving fast enough in, and that is you focus on your hypo talent, or the leaders from a hierarchy standpoint, right? Look at your whole talent pool as a base of potential leaders, or leaders today. What are you doing to invest in their leadership, right? And their rising impact to contribute to the firm, right? You know, is your focus of leadership too narrow, right? As opposed to across your whole population. And then the last, and this will not be a surprise to all of you, fundamental leadership belief, is that culture is your ultimate and only sustainable competitive advantage. Given enough time and resources, another company can copy what you have and what you do. It's happening all of the time, actually, in this age of constant disruption. So culture, which are the stated and behavioral norms of every organization reflected in your policies, your procedures, your practices, by your leaders, what they say, but more importantly, what they do. Culture is your competitive advantage, your only competitive advantage, and sustainable one, because it's formed by your people today and the people that you're bringing in tomorrow. Right? And does your organization embrace culture in a way that Whataburger does? I loved hearing what Peggy had to say first thing this morning. I mean, it's kind of full circle in the day. Culture, I mean, that's my belief, is that culture is your key. And that's how I've always led. It's how I've had the career that I've had. And each of you play a role in it, but you cannot do it alone. You need leaders from all across the business to live it and catalyze the change with you. So.
Wonderfully said. Ann Chow, former CEO of AT&T Business, author of Lead Bigger. Thank you so much for your wisdom and for your leadership.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you. Thank you.